All right, this breaking news. Sources tell CNN that Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino has told people that he's considering resigning amid a major clash.
On CNN, breaking news reveals FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino is considering resigning amid explosive tensions between the FBI and Department of Justice surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein files. A heated confrontation with Attorney General Pam Bondi, infighting at the highest levels, and growing backlash from the MAGA base all collide in this political firestorm. Let's break this down.
Between the FBI and DOJ over the continued fallout from the release or lack thereof of the Jeffrey Epstein memo. Joining us right now in files, joining us right now on the phone is CNN anchor and chief White House correspondent Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, what more are you learning?
Yeah, Fred, it remains to be seen if he actually follows through with what he has told colleagues. But what we do know is that Dan Bongino has told people he is considering resigning as the deputy director of the FBI over the fallout that has continued ever since this memo was released last Sunday. The anger inside the MAGA base has only continued to grow instead of going away, as some officials inside hoped it would. And now our colleagues, along with Christian Holmes, Hannah Rabinowitz, and Evan Perez, we're hearing that he's considering resigning after they had this heated confrontation with the Attorney General Pam Bondi over the handling of this earlier this week. And basically there was a meeting at the White House where the FBI Director, Kash Patel, was there, the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles. They were questioned about whether they were part of a story that there was basically some infighting over how
This exposes the raw internal conflict and finger-pointing at the top, showing White House officials dragged into a blame game over sensitive leaks and a memo that nobody wants to own.
Came out and this memo that said we're not going to be releasing any more information related to Jeffrey Epstein. And I should note that we are told Bongino denied leaking any story to this outlet that it was reported on. But there has been a lot of fighting between Attorney General Pam Bondi specifically and the leadership over at the FBI over who's to blame in this situation. I think the context here is obviously Dan Bongino, Kash Patel. They came from this MAGA world where they themselves had pushed a lot of questions about the so-called client list that Epstein had beforehand. And now the MAGA base is just not pleased or satisfied with what they've said in this memo that came out unsigned from the Justice Department and the FBI on Sunday night. So what we are told is Dan Bongino did not show up to work today, that he is essentially not there out of protest. But whether or not he actually follows through on this still remains to be seen. We're still reporting that out. But it just speaks to the backlash that the White House is very much feeling and understanding after this memo came out, despite President Trump the other day in the cabinet room asking, who still cares about this? One thing we know is the MAGA base certainly does.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thanks so much for that. We'll check back with you as you learn more. CNN senior justice correspondent Evan Perez is also with us. And so, Evan, is it your understanding that if Bongino were to resign, it's as a result of the infighting, including with the AG, Pam Bondi, or is it mostly over the disappointment of these Epstein files either not existing or not being released?
Well, look, I think Fred, there's a larger issue here, and I think if you look at Dan Bongino, he was a very successful podcaster. He had a very big following online, certainly very financially successful with his podcast that was a very, very strong appeal inside MAGA world. And this job really hasn't been, I think, very much fun. And if you
Dan Bongino's confession reveals the personal toll and dissatisfaction behind the scenes, portraying the FBI deputy director struggling in a role at odds with his previous influential media power and MAGA support.
You've seen him doing some of his interviews in right-leaning media and conservative media. He has said as much. He has said that this job is taking a toll on his life, on his personal life, with his family. He's having to essentially be separated from them while he's here in Washington doing this job. It's not nearly what he's used to back in the days, obviously. He is someone who came from law enforcement. So, I think there's a bigger story here in terms of what Bongino is thinking. But I certainly think part of what Caitlin laid out just now is partly the story here, and that is that there is some daylight between top FBI officials and top Justice Department officials over the handling of this Epstein matter. You'll remember that back in February, the Attorney General Pam Bondi led this event at the White House where they brought in all these MAGA influencers, these conservative influencers on social media, and gave them, with great ceremony, these binders that were supposed to contain these Epstein files. Turns out, though, most of the files were actually out there for years. And so it was a great embarrassment, both to Bondi and to FBI officials who really didn't have much role in this. And so that's where some of this begins and where you see some of the distance. And so I'll point out one quick thing that on social media today, Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, has tried to respond to some of the pushback from Lara Loomer and some of the other, and he has basically tried to point out that Kash Patel and Don Bongino and the Justice Department leadership are all on the same page, that there is no daylight. If you look at the tweet, he says, the suggestion by anyone that there was any daylight between the FBI and DOJ leadership on this memo's composition and release is patently false. Now, he's referring to the memo that went out this week where they said there's no there, we're not releasing anything else. It's very clear, Fred, that there is daylight between the FBI and the Justice Department over the...
This admission from a senior justice correspondent blows open the media narrative, highlighting deep fractures and leadership disputes undermining public trust during a scandal with national implications.
Handling of this, and so we'll see how this plays out in the coming days and weeks. We don't know whether Bongino is coming back to work next week. It appears he's taken the day off. He's down in Florida somewhere. And so we don't know whether he's going to be back to work next week, but we certainly know that this is not a story that is going to go away because, as Caitlin pointed out just now, certainly MAGA world is not done with this. They want more, and they want to see more from those documents that the FBI still has.
And it is evident this is just the latest in what seems to be a litany of turmoil that we're seeing in recent days and weeks involving top leadership in this administration. All right, Evan Perez, thank you so much.
The turmoil between Dan Bongino, the FBI, and the DOJ over the Epstein file fallout is more than a simple resignation rumor. It reveals a fractured leadership wrestling with credibility, political pressure, and transparency failures. With MAGA base anger growing and officials distancing themselves, the story is far from over. Stay tuned and drop your take below. What does Bongino's potential exit mean for justice and accountability?